Dr. Satish Prasad Rath, Chief Innovation Manager, Healthcare Research, Xerox Innovation Group. Mr. Gopan Devanahalli, COO, Manipal Healthcare. Mr. Shirish Sahai, CEO, Walter Clouvers. Mr. Anil Bajpai, Co-founder and Chief Technology Officer, PMHLC. Dr. Sandeep Diwan, Head of the Department, Critical Care, Fortis Escort Group, Philips India.
So, would request you to take your seats. Gentlemen, for being on the panel. All the guests, the attendees, the delegates, request you to take your seats. So this session, we're going to have a lot of presentations, so real life examples. So we have 2 providers on this session. We have 5 technologists on this session, so pretty much covering the entire spectrum. To use, how do we use predictive analytics and big data. Each speaker is going to present for 5 to 6 minutes. And after that, we have a few questions that the panel is going to talk about. And post which, the questions are open to the audience. So I'm going to start off with the first presentation. And apart from being the president of HIMSS India, I'm also the co-founder and CEO of a company called Enlytics. We are an advanced analytics company focused on healthcare. We cater to about 1,650 hospitals and governments across North America, Asia, and Africa. Our goal is basically to give 100 million years of healthy lives back to humanity using predictive analytics. So the typical things, so we have a ready-made platform which has got predictive models, accountable care organization solution for the US market, population health management, real-world evidence, clinical dashboards, health economics, outcomes research, revenue dashboards, and so on and so forth. But very interestingly, I'll just give you an example over here. These are some of the models that are there actually available out of the box within the system. I know it's very difficult for the panel to actually look at the presentation. So what we have over here is across cardiology, nephrology, pulmonary diseases, gastrointestinal, oncology, chronic diseases. So there are a lot of these models that are available. And what does it really do? The best idea is to actually showcase in a demonstration. So we actually predict what is the probability for a patient to get readmitted after the patient is discharged. And it does it with almost like 85% accuracy. The screen that you're seeing over here, the system actually stratifies the risk of all the patients from a chronic disease perspective. So it says who are your high-risk patients, medium risk, low-risk patients, and actually shows that data over there. At the bottom, you will see models with predicting hypertension, diabetes, readmission, and so on and so forth. Some of these models are actually more than 90% accurate, and they're being used in India at various hospitals. More interesting, and probably the reason why I'm actually showing this is to get a lot of questions from the doctors in the audience over here. Interestingly, we have almost 240 delegates who are clinicians in today's event. Most of them seem to be having tea and coffee, so waiting for them to come back. So what you can actually see over here is on the left-hand side is the diseases of the patient, the comorbid conditions that the patient has got. So this patient has a digestive system complication, there is an abdominal aneurysm without mention of rupture, sepsis, and so on and so forth. And the system on the right side actually predicts what's going to happen, either an event within a given comorbid condition that is going to occur, or a new disease, a new comorbid condition that actually is going to present itself with a certain amount of probability in a certain set of given days. The same predictive analytics can also be applied. You know, for example, we're speaking about how do we predict diseases to occur in a patient in advance. So as you can see, the system is actually coming back and saying that what is the risk category. So it's giving a percentage over here and saying in how many days that this can be achieved. So again, a lot of you actually as clinicians have your reports, your radiology reports, lab results, or notes that you have probably got it typed in your hospital or clinic. The system has the ability using natural language processing to actually take that and predict this information. So today, most of the systems out there actually do this. So I'm sure Jay Seelan is going to talk about it from an Oracle perspective. There could be others who are going to be talking about it. So natural language processing today is becoming a very integral part of IT solutions. So you're actually going to take a textual note like this and convert it into a keyword or into an ICD diagnosis or a CPT without any human intervention. In fact, we have imaging analytics, and I'm hoping someone is going to talk about it. So today, the ability for systems to take a DICOM and an image, let's say a CT lung image or a fundoscopic image, and actually say without human intervention with a 90% accuracy, to come back and say this patient, because of this fundoscopic image, the patient is actually has diabetic retinopathy stage or grade 3 or grade 4. Or the ability to look at a CT lung and actually say whether the patient has got, what stage grade cancer that the patient actually has got. So there is a huge amount of work that's happening in deep learning space, and I'm hoping that we're going to be talking about that shortly. For hospitals, in terms of revenue forecasting, their inventory optimization, so this is all a part of your analytics. So as long as there is large data, the amount of savings that can basically happen for hospitals is huge. So this is something which we're going to hear from, Ms. Gopal Devanhalli, the CEO of Manipal Healthcare. We're also going to hear from Dr. Diwan from Fortis Escorts Group, from a clinical perspective, how it's actually being used. So just as an example, this is something that's being done in the United States. At the bottom right-hand corner, you see traffic light signals. So we can actually predict in the next 52 weeks in which weeks there is a high risk of a patient getting a respiratory attack. Could be asthma, COPD, whatever respiratory attack. And it's almost like 85, 90% accurate, saying that the patient is going to get an attack. So you can't stop an attack from occurring, but what you can at least do is the care coordinators can call them and ensure that they're carrying their medication or inhalers with them. So an unnecessary admission or an emergent admission can actually be stopped. So the last one is basically from so if you look at the more from a myocardial infarction perspective, how you can actually look at the data, there is a bottom score that comes up. The system is predicting that this patient has a high probability of getting a recurrence of a myocardial infarction, or it could be a first-time occurrence of a myocardial infarction. What the system does is it's not applying simple risk scores. So most of the time when we talk about predictive analytics and big data, so these are machine learning algorithms, the deep learning algorithms, neural networks that is basically applied on large population data sets. And the system comes back and says that out of these million diabetic patients or cardiac patients that I have across hospitals, across the world, these models are used now to predict what is going to happen to each one of us. So the day is not very far off, 10, 15, 20 years. In the future, and it could be even 2 years, I'm sure there'll be a great company will come up and say, you know what, I'm pretty much 99% accurate, which will give the power to the physicians to look at all of this information and help them to take the right diagnosis, prognosis at that juncture. It is basically an assistive tool for them because as the data is becoming huge and huge, it's becoming very difficult for humans to, for any human being to gather all of that information at the point of care and say this needs to be done. So I'll just leave, I know I've just gone through a whole lot of things, but the idea was just to give you a snapshot of what's happening in the industry. And I'll let my colleague Jay Seelan take it further from here.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk about how do we really aggregate data from multiple source systems and then really use it for meaningful insights that you can gain. So if you look at the overall health system globally, there are 4 fundamental factors that's really impacting. One, more and more we see the health system moving from fee-for-service to outcome-driven model. Secondly, the fundamentals of science is changing. The way how medicine has been practiced 10, 20 years ago, and now it's completely kind of changing in a way. And third, so we are talking about a lot of data. In the past, we used to have few terabytes of data, but now each hospital is kind of managing almost like petabytes of information. And lastly, if you look at regulatory standpoint, the patient privacy laws are becoming much more stringent. Now, if you look at how all these factors impacting in the health system in our country point of view, we still use fair amount of point applications, homegrown tools. Even if we use some standard solution, it's not really able to interoperate or communicate with other applications. So these are fundamental challenges. Now, how do we really transform this in terms of where it is versus where we want to kind of leapfrog? So I'm just going to kind of show a little bit about the transformation journey of healthcare. You see that there are 3 different the growth engines in terms of how the medicine is practiced. So in the past, it used to be a lot of trial and error because a lot of information is not really available for physicians to make a meaningful diagnosis. Now it's slowly moving from trial and error to evidence-based medicine, and eventually it's kind of leading to precision medicine. How do you really provide targeted therapies accurately to the particular target segment? Now, if you look at the lower bottom, the trend is it's clearly moving from core transactional applications to a more context-sensitive analytical applications. Like what Vamsi talked about is actually one of the context-sensitive analytical applications. Now, so how do we really make this transformation possible? Moving from trial and error medicine to evidence-based, eventually leading to precision medicine. So clearly the answer is data. Data and analytics can really kind of help us to make that transition. One is, so fundamentally what we're talking about is asking the hard questions. Now, how do you really ask these questions? For example, what works for the patient and why it works for certain patient population, right? Who it works for, how do you really make it targeted therapies to the individual patients? Now, can we do comparative clinical analysis in terms of what works best for the particular patient community? Or when it should be used in terms of best practices to really get insights for all these questions. So clearly we need to kind of look at analytics as a way to do. Now, if you look at analytics again, there are 2 parts. One is the data analysis and representation. So this is where a lot of people kind of spend their time and effort. But I'm going to talk about the other part of it, which is how do you really aggregate data from diverse source systems? How do you really normalize it and then really use it for meaningful analysis? So that's the hard part, which kind of I'll cover today. So you see that in the screen, like a lot of source systems, clinical systems, finance systems, HR applications, supply chain, and research data, a lot of data from clinical trials. Now, how do you really put all of them in one single scalable healthcare data model? So that's a fundamental challenge that we have. Now, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time in this slide. It will really help you to understand how do you really take data from all these source systems. So we, in Oracle, what we've done is we built a tool called Data Integrator. So it has pre-built ETLs, which we call as extract, transform, load. So it can actually talk to different source systems, pull up data, and put that into a data warehouse foundation, where you can actually do the mapping of source data into the warehouse foundation data. Now, then once you got a copy of the data moved into the warehouse, then you could apply business rules. Now, there are multiple ways you can handle this. One is either you take a copy of data moving from source to the warehouse foundation, or you can even make it real-time data integration. As and when the data hits clinical systems, you can actually make that available in the warehouse itself, and then you apply the business rules. Now, there are 3 important points that I want to talk about. One is the terminology normalization. So Vamsi talked about how do you normalize terminology like ICD-10, SNOMED CT. So think of a health system where they have 2 different HIS systems. One HIS uses, say, ICD-10, the other system uses SNOMED CT. Now, how do I really rationalize the whole thing? In the new source system, I want everything to be converted into SNOMED CT as a base. So you could really do that through this platform that I'm talking about. The other important thing is MPI. Now, again, we're looking at multiple patient IDs within the health system itself. Some of these IDs could be created over a period of time, or it could be through mergers and acquisitions where the hospital could be using different IDs itself. Now, how do you really identify the duplicates? How do you merge the health records? Today, if you look at in India, we don't have the concept of family health record. So how many hospitals can identify who is the parent of the patient, who is the mother? Do we really have access to a consolidated view of family health record? So all this is very much possible when you have platforms like this. And look at the right extreme. So these are the data mods. So what we've done is we have almost about 55 pre-prioritized data mods. It also has the relevant APIs. So any application vendors or partners can actually build rapidly analytical applications over and above this platform. Now, the fundamental, if you look at the base of the whole platform is the data model. So we built one of the world's best healthcare data model. So this has been used by large organizations like Mayo Clinic, UPMC. Now we have a number of customers who are using this data model. So what is actually this all about is single source of truth. You have data from different source systems. Now put all of them in one single scalable healthcare data model. So in fact, we have about 500 plus tables, 5,500 plus attributes. So any data field that you have, whether it's public health system or private, so we have provision to map all of them in one single data model. Now, so we also have a tool called Cohort Explorer. So this is very simple web-based tool. You can give access to clinicians. So clinicians themselves can actually test the hypothesis. They can define the inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. They can actually look at, drop down into each of these elements, diagnosis, specimen, can go narrow down and build, test, and validate the hypothesis itself. I'm not going to spend more time on these. I think Vamsi already talked about some of these dashboards which you can do. So I'm going to talk about another dimension of the whole analytics, right? So you saw that the value chain, where how we moved from trial and error medicine to evidence-based and then to the precision medicine. So one of the important thing is genomic data. Why this is important? If you look at most of the illnesses are caused by genetic abnormalities. Either we inherit those genetically through our parents, or it could be through some of the mutations that happen over a period of time. So it is important to really bring in the clinical data along with the genetic information of the patient to really make some meaningful analysis and targeted interventions. So what we've done is we actually have capability to take raw data from sequencing machines. As you all know, there's a number of sequencing machines available in the market. It could be Illumina, LifeCode, next generation sequencing. So all these provides the raw data in different formats. So what we've done is make it really agnostic. You put that raw data into this platform, the omics data model, and then interpret it, and then provide a summary, and also cross-compare it with the publicly available research data, that is public domain reference data as well. So this actually gives a lot of new insights which doesn't exist in the past. Now, this is just an example of how this entire data model is built. So you see in the top layer, Ensemble, Hugo, these are all the publicly available research databases. So what I'm talking about is take a specimen of a patient, take a gene sequence, and compare that against all these reference data and find if there is any mutation already available for that particular sequence, or is it completely new insight where we need to either move towards the research process or not. So that is the kind of possibilities. Again, the number of analysis you can do, it could be, say, simple variant analysis. Those of you come from the molecular biology background probably will be able to relate much better in terms of how do we do this gene expression analysis, copy number variation analysis,
Jay?
And all of them. Yeah. So I'm going to just, the last, I think, again, so I talked about genomic data, I talked about clinical data. Now, how do I converge all of them in one single model. So you take a patient group, patient population, and then find out for that particular patient population, what is the gene sequence? Is there a possibility of mutations? So that is the kind of value that you could actually derive. For example, to answer these questions in terms of find patients who are poor respondents of particular drug, why having a mutation in a particular gene sequence? Can we really answer these types of questions? So that's a fundamental challenge again. So last, I'm just going to end my presentation with one important thing. So these are the latest statistics published by Nature in April 2015. So what it says is, among 10 top leading marketed drugs, the effectiveness is actually 1 in 25. So are we really taking medication that is meant for large population, but is it really effective to the individual population or not? So that's the fundamental challenge. So clearly the world is moving from translational into a precision medicine. So the technology that I talked about can actually enable, in terms of convergence of clinical data with the genomic data, and provide meaningful analysis. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Mr. Gopal Devnalli. I'm sorry, sir. It's Satish, Dr. Satish Rai. Yeah, there.